So we've looked at a parent component and a child component. We had a blog list component, which was a parent, and then the blog post tile component, which was a child, and we were able to send data from the parent to the child. We were able to communicate from the parent to the child. Now, how about communicating from the child to the parent? What if you want to send something from the child component to the parent component? The important question is, what is that something? What would you want to send from the child to the parent? If it's just data, you could technically use whatever model, the input we've used, and send data from the child to the parent. Because when the parent component sends an object to the child, both the parent and child are holding on to the same object. So when the parent makes a change to that object, the child gets it. And if the child makes a change to that object, the parent gets it. So you technically have communication from the child to the parent. But what we are talking about is something a little bit different. It's not data. It is events. What if the child needs to trigger an event on the parent? What if the child needs to tell the parent that something happened? This is very common when you're dealing with components with the UI. Let me give you an example. Let's say for our blog post web application, you want to create this pagination feature, right? So you have this paginator at the bottom, which lets the user choose between multiple pages, and each page consists of a bunch of blog posts. You can go from page to page by clicking on the pagination. Let's say I want to implement that as a separate component. I don't want it to be a part of the blog list component. I'm going to create a separate component. I'm going to call it paginator. And then the whole purpose of the paginator is to give you those list of pages. And then when a page number is clicked, it just emits an event. And then the blog list component receives that event and then knows what to do and then shows the right page depending on what page number the user clicked. So what we're talking about here is having a child component called the paginator, and then it should show the number of pages, and when the click event happens, it should communicate the event to the parent component, which is the blog list component here. How do we do that? Well, let's take a look. I'm going to start by creating that component, ng-generate component. I'll call this paginator. And we have this component created and available for us. And it's the default paginator works, which will do for now. And now here at the bottom, I'm going to use the selector. I'm pretty sure that that's app paginator. Is the selector? Yep, it's app-paginator. And now when I do an ng-serve, I should see that paginator works over here. All right, great. Now the next thing I'm going to do is in my blog list components, here is where I have hard-coded 2 blog posts. Now this will not do. When we're doing something like pagination, we need a lot more blog posts. So now what I'm going to do is, rather than have this be a simple array of blog posts, I'm going to have this be an array of arrays where each element is going to be one page, right? So blog post is going to be an array of pages, and each page is going to be an array of blog posts. We are looking at a 2-dimensional array here. The first dimension is for the page, and the second dimension is for the blog post itself. So I'm going to get rid of this here, and then instead I'm going to have a hard-coded list. I'm still having a hard-coded list, but this is going to be an array of an array. So I'm going to collapse this so that you can see this better. The still blog post is going to be an array of a bunch of blog posts. So each blog post is going to contain the title and the summary, right? So this is going to be page 1. Page 1 is going to be one array. Page 2 is going to be another array. And page 3 is going to be another array. So we have an array of arrays, and this is what's the structure of blog posts now. Now that I have this is not going to work. So what I need to do is I'm going to just put this as blog post of 0 for now, so that I'm just loading the first page all the time. All right, so now I'm loading the first page, and I want to make sure the click functionality still works. All right, that still works. So now I have added an extra dimension. Now let's build the paginator component. Now what does this need to display? I'm going to use the Bootstrap pagination component that you can find out at getbootstrap.com. You can see all the components that are available to us. I am interested in pagination. And this gives us a nice pagination component for us to use. I'm going to move this back. In my pagination component, I'm going to get rid of the previous and the next. We don't need that. I'm just going to have 3 pages. And switch back here. And here you see our nice pagination control. Now, rather than this be a hard-coded list of 3 pages, I want this to be as many pages as the data structure has in the blog list component. Now here, this.blog post is an array of 3 arrays, right? It's an array of 3 pages. Now I want to figure out how many pages this array of arrays has, and then send that to the pagination component. So I need to accept the number of pages as an input. Now you know how this works. I'm going to start here. And in my blog list component, I need to pass in the number of pages to the paginator component, and that would be this.blogpost.length. And now here, in my markup, I'm going to say number of pages equals, I'm going to create this as an attribute, which is where I can pass in the input, equals blog posts dot length. But now of course I need to resolve this and not pass a literal string. Now the component needs to accept this as an input. Just passing this here will not do. In fact, it's going to give you an error. So I'm going to go to the paginator component. I'm going to accept this as an input. Add input, don't forget the parentheses, number of pages. Now when I have that number in my component, what I want to do is not have a static list of links here. Instead, I want there to be as many li and a tags as there are number of pages. And this is where things get a little bit interesting. Now you're familiar with the NGFAR. The NGFAR lets you loop through a certain item depending on how many elements there are in an array. What I want to do here is a little bit different. I don't have an array. I have a number, and I want NGFAR to loop through whatever number there is. Well, it's technically not looping through. You want to make as many copies of this thing, of this DOM structure, as the number of pages you've got. So in order to handle this kind of a scenario, well, you don't have an array, but you still need an NGFAR. One way of handling this is to create this thing called pages, which is an array. And it's a number array. It doesn't really contain data, but it just contains an array for us to loop through in NGFAR. So what I'm going to do here is pages is going to be a new array of number of pages. This dot number of pages rather. So there's going to be a this dot. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating a number array, which is basically a new array with elements equal to the number of pages. So if the number of pages is 3, it's going to create a new array of 3 elements, and each of those elements is undefined at this time. But that'll do. Now what we can do is loop through using NGFAR. I'm going to say star NGFAR let page of pages. Now when I press save, you're going to get 3 copies of this. But if you notice, it's all saying 1. Can I do this? Can I put double curly page here? Well, I cannot, because each element of pages is pretty much undefined. I don't have an initialized value here. I'm just creating an array of the certain length, but each element value is undefined. The length works fine for NGFAR because it's going to loop through as many elements the array has, but then the element value itself is not very useful. In order to figure out what position this is, you use the index as I, and this is the syntax which lets you get hold of the loop index into a variable, and then I can use that variable. Of course, I'm going to have to add one because it starts from 0. So here you see it prints the page numbers 0, 1, and 2 because the loop starts at 0. I'm just going to do I plus 1. And now we've got the 3 page numbers. So as the parent component adds new pages, let's say this is a dynamic value that we are getting from a REST API or whatever, and then as the number of pages increases or decreases from the response, this is going to show the right number of pages here. All right, so we've got the numbers, but this is not good enough. Now what we need to do is, as the user clicks on these pages, we want to change the page viewed. So right now we're printing page 0. So if you go to the blog list here, we're just printing page 0 all the time. Now when the user clicks on page 2 here, we want it to print the second element in the blog post array. And when we click on 3, we want it to print the third element in the blog post array. And each of those elements in the blog post array is an array of posts, and we need to see those posts in the right page. Now, how do we do this? Well, the first thing that comes to mind is you cannot have this hard-coded anymore. It needs to be something that the blog list component maintains as the current page. There needs to be a current page variable, and as the user moves from page to page, the current page variable is going to be updated. So let's do that first. I'm going to go to the blog list component.ts, and here I'm going to create a current page member variable. And on NGInit, I'm going to initialize this dot current page equals 0. Again, you notice I could do the equals 0 over here, but I do this over here. It's not a big deal for this number, but most of the initialization, I prefer doing it in ng on init so that I have this consolidated place where all the business logic resides and helps with testing, as we've already discussed. All right, so now that I have the current page equal to 0, I'm going to go to my component template, and then I'm going to say blog post of current page. So it starts out with the first page being the current page. This is great, but now nothing is updating this current page. Now what we want to do is, as the user clicks on these page numbers, the paginator component needs to somehow communicate to the blog list component saying, hey, this page number was clicked. And then the blog list component needs to update the current page. All right. So let's say in my blog list component, I have, let me collapse this huge method here. Let's say I have the method here called update page and then new page. And this is going to say this dot current page equals new page. Right? Let's say the page needs to be updated to page number 3, and now this gets 2 gets sent here, and this dot current page needs to be updated to 2. Now, who is going to call this? Who is going to call update page? Can paginator call update page? The paginator component shouldn't really know that its parent has a method called update page, because the paginator component could be used in a bunch of different places. And not all of them could have the update page. It could be used for various different reasons. So the paginator component really shouldn't be aware of a parent page's method. What it should do instead is just trigger an event. The paginator component will say, hey, this page was clicked, and then that's it. Now the parent component needs to listen to that page click event and then do the right thing. In this case, in the blog list component, it happens to be updating the page. In some other parent component, it could be something totally different. So that's the model we are looking at. The paginator component sends out an event, and the parent component listens to the event and does something with it. Now, how do you send out an event from the child component? Now, that is where the output comes into the question. A component has input, which is data. We've already seen. It accepts data, and then Angular sets the data. Every Angular component can also emit an output, and the output is always an event. Now let's say I want to create an event called page number clicked. Let's say this is an event. Now I can make this an event by choosing the @output annotation. Just like an @input is something that you tell Angular to provide an input, the @output annotation tells Angular that this is something that emits an event. There is a particular type for this. It is called event emitter. Event emitter is an Angular class which is a generic. The type of the generic is the type of the event that is emitted. You can emit an event with a number value. You can emit an event with an object. It is basically something that goes with the event, right? There's the data that goes with the event. In this case, when a page number is clicked, there is some data that goes with the event. Can you guess what the data is? Yes, it's the number of the page that was clicked. So if I click page number 2, it needs to send 2, or in this case 1, because it's 0 indexed. So this event emitter emits events of type number. So event emitter is added to the import automatically. Thank you, Visual Studio Code. Now this is something that needs to be listened to. The parent component listens to this event emitter. Now I'm going to, I know I did a declaration here, but what I'm going to do instead is create a new object rather than do a declaration. I'm going to say equals new event emitter. I want there to be an event emitter always. So I'm going to create this instance of event emitter. Now, when somebody clicks on this, what happens? Right now, nothing happens because in my paginator markup, I'm not doing anything. There is an href equals hash, but I'm not doing anything. So let me capture this click event. You know how to capture a click event now. I'm going to do the parentheses, click equals page number clicked. I need to pass in the page number. Of course, I'm going to pass in the value of I here. So when the first one is clicked, 0 gets sent, second one is clicked, 1 gets sent, third one, 2 gets sent, and so on. So here in my paginator component, I'm going to create that method. That accepts a page number. And then here, I need to emit the event. The page number was clicked. I need to tell whoever is listening that this page number was clicked. So in order to do that, I access the event emitter over here. Let's say this dot page number clicked. There is a method on the event emitter called emit. Now, if you just do this, it is going to emit an event without any data. But now we need to send data. We need to send what page number was actually clicked, because how would the parent know, right? So now I'm going to do a this dot page number click dot emit. I know I'm using the same name here as the method, which is why it's giving me this error. I'm going to call this page number click. Now, when I do this, I'm emitting an event whenever a certain page number is clicked. Now, this makes this paginator component truly reusable. It does not worry too much about what the parent is doing. All it's doing is emitting an event with the event emitter. And now when I click on a page number, it's actually emitting out events. You don't see anything, but trust me, it is emitting an event. Now, in order to figure out if the event is being emitted or not, we need to actually listen to it. The parent component needs to listen to it. How do we do that? In my blog list, parent component, we know that the app paginator is emitting an event, and the name of the event is page number click. How do I listen to it? Well, just like the input member variable affects how you send values to the component, the output member variable affects how you listen to it. So here's how you do it. Page number click equals, and then this is your function that you want to call when that event is emitted. What is the function you want to call when the event is emitted? It's update page. So I'm going to call update page. But wait a minute, this is not a browser attribute, it's an Angular attribute. And since this is coming from the component, from the child component to this component that we are referring to, this is parentheses. Remember, events are parentheses. Data, remember, variable binding is square brackets. All right, so now with this, what we've done is we have told Angular that when the child component emits this event, which is the page number click, please call this method. All right, so now there is one more thing to be done, but before we do that, here's what I want to do. I want to have a console.log event emitted and method executed. Now I'm going to do the developer console here. I'm going to go to the console. And here, when I click the button, you see here, the event is emitted. But guess what happens? There is no data that's coming through. Well, data is coming through, but I'm not capturing it here. You see, when you call this function, you're not passing in any data. What you need to pass as an argument to the update page is the number that this thing emitted. It's that thing, the payload of the event that you need to send to the update page. And there is a special syntax for it to capture the event that was emitted, and that is the $event. When you do a $event, you're basically telling Angular, whatever is that thing that this event emitted, pass that to this thing, to this function. So you're basically wiring those two together. So when this guy sends a page number, you want this guy to receive it. And you do this by using the $event syntax. This is what wires the two together. I'm going to break this into separate lines so that it's easier to read. All right. Now with this, we are doing two-way communication. This one is sending data from the parent to the child, and this one is sending control or event from the child to the parent. And along with the event, there is data being sent as well. Now with this, we'll try this one more time. I'm going to close this. And now when I switch to page 2, you see here, it switches automatically because we are updating the page number, the current page, and then the current page is bound to this. You see how it all fits together now. And I switch to page 3, I get the third page. And this is how we are able to have these separate components talk to each other. And in this video, we learn how to do this by learning how to emit an event from the child component and listen to it and do certain things based on the event emitted in the parent component.